welcome aboard. This is the Passball Show, brought to you, as always, by JohnPielli.com. Happy to be with you on Wednesday, the 28th of November, 2017. Lots of stuff to get into, and I do want to recap. I'll start off by recapping some of the stuff that I talked about yesterday. And I did get some very good feedback, some very good discussion going. Obviously, when there's a label put on you, and you could say as it could apply to me in a particular instance, or as it applies to anybody that is in the public spotlight, whether it's true or not, whether there's some gray area in there, whether it's something legitimately that somebody did wrong that they have to face the music for, it's unfortunately something that's going to stick with you for a long time. And in some cases, it could stick with you forever. I mean, if you look at what happened with Ray Rice and, the domestic violence with him and his wife, unfortunately, that was something that happened. That was something that he had to answer to. He took the fall for.
All right, girls, have fun.
And is continuously having to deal with that. He's a former NFL football player now, likely to never get another job as a player. He may someday decide to get into the realm of coaching, but if he does, as much as it doesn't seem like it matters in a court of public opinion, it does matter. And I'm going to conclude my discussion about Greg Schiano and not getting the Tennessee job to say that that's something that was cast very unfairly against the person that legitimately was not devious. He didn't do something completely wrong. There's a picture that's been pretty much painted that makes it seem as if he somehow enabled those horrid and terrible acts by the assistant coach, Jerry Sandusky. And unfortunately, that could very well cost him the opportunity of getting another job as a college football head coach. And I don't think it's right. I think Tennessee did a lousy job. They felt like they had to cave into the pressure. And I just hope that everybody that was involved, that pushed to see Greg Schiano not hired as the head football coach at Tennessee, can have themselves analyzed and studied and broken down every little thing that they could have done and didn't decide to do, and have that held against him the same way that Greg Schiano is having that held against him. And I hope he gets a solid job as a college football head coach. Unfortunately, he's going to have to deal with the same cycle of negativity that's going to be behind it. And it's unfortunate because this isn't something that he did as a coach. He has a good track record for what he did in his years at Rutgers. Got him an opportunity to coach in the NFL. And you could look at the thousands and thousands of documents that were involved with depositions and everything with the Jerry Sandusky trial. And Greg Schiano's name does not come up on it at all. Yet he is somehow treated as if he was one of the ones that enabled those kids to get molested by Jerry Sandusky. And it's unfortunate because it's something that couldn't be any further from the truth. He was no more guilty than any player that played at Penn State over those series of years under Joe Paterno. And of course, Joe Paterno ends up being fired. He ends up being remembered for that, as opposed to the 45 years of success he had at one of the great college football programs in the country. Yet there was players that came in and out of there while Jerry Sandusky was molesting little boys. And you tell me over the series of however many years it was it 10, was it 15, was it 20 years that this was going on? And you tell me that there is no players that could be held accountable or could have said something just along the same lines as Greg Schiano. Pass Ball Show, we talk about baseball, sports, and uniting America. We'll have another message for our American people today, later on in the program. I'm going to start out by talking about the latest that just came down with the New York Giants deciding that they are going to, at least for the short-term future, start Geno Smith as their quarterback, putting Eli Manning on the bench. And I understand if you're a Giants fan, this is gonna hit you pretty hard. And I understand that most Giants fans are pretty upset with the way this is handled. And if you quote Cris Carter from what he said when he was talking to a group of college kids, saying, you could cause trouble. You're going to get into stuff that you shouldn't be getting into, but make sure you have a fall guy. The fall guy for the New York Giants is Eli Manning. And you can make a case that they basically took a part of his body off of him and still expected him to succeed in spite of everything. And if you look at his season, it hasn't been good. The Giants have been terrible. That blame can start from the general manager down to the coach, to the coaching staff, to the players. And outside of the head football coach, the person that the most responsibility is put on is the quarterback. So there's a part of it that makes a little sense. The part of it that doesn't make sense is the Giants turning to Geno Smith. And Geno Smith has been in this league for a couple of years now. He had the opportunity to quarterback for the Jets a couple of years ago. He's at a point where he's getting his first job as a legitimate backup. And I'm sure in Geno Smith's heart of hearts, he believes he could be a quarterback in the National Football League. He could start for some team. Well, he'll have a little bit of an opportunity to show something. Excuse me. And, the Giants at 2-9 right now have absolutely nothing to play for. But that thought that playing Geno Smith kind of gives you a glimpse into the future, I think it will be kind of hard to see or expect the Giants to go forward with Geno Smith as their quarterback. I mentioned earlier this week, or maybe the end of last week, when I was talking about how players, star players, are handled getting into the twilights of their careers. And I mentioned Ernie Banks with Leo DeRocher in the late 60s with the Chicago Cubs. Leo DeRocher said all the time he wishes when he was the manager of the Cubs that he had Ernie Banks in the prime of his career. And you could make a very good case, and it's the honest truth, that Ernie Banks in the 1950s was leaps and bounds the player that Ernie Banks was in the late 1960s. And Leo DeRocher had to make some tough decisions. He had to decide how often should he play Banks. Obviously, he's a fan favorite. The fans love him. But he's a shell of his former self. It's not as cut and dry with Eli Manning. And that's why I think there's going to be a little more rage and a little more anger amongst the fans of the New York Football Giants. What Eli Manning has meant for that franchise is obviously outstanding. We don't need to talk about it. 2 Super Bowls, beating the New England Patriots both years. We were talking yesterday about the Patriots, how at this point in the game, they're still the best team hands down. And I'll believe that another team is up there when they go out and beat the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl. Well, one team has been able to do that over the last 17 years. And that team did it twice with the same quarterback. So that obviously stands for something. Eli Manning is probably not arguably, probably the greatest quarterback the New York Giants have ever had. But even the most die-hardest of Giants fans realize that in spite of the circumstances that the Giants are dealing with, no running game, no offensive line, no wide receivers, playing an offense that you can make a case that was much different than Eli Manning was used to playing when he was under Tom Coughlin. They weren't set to throw the ball deep downfield on 5-7 step drops as often, which is really Eli Manning's best abilities. He's showing his best when he's doing that. When he has the time to throw, he's scoping the field. He has good receivers running good routes. He hasn't had any of that the last couple of years. And he managed, in spite of an offense which failed to score 30 points in any game in 2016, to lead his team to an 11-5 record. And I know the defense had a lot to do with it. They absolutely do. But Manning always seemed to get the most out of the lack of talent that was around him. Unfortunately, this year came, and the Giants didn't have a running game, didn't have an offensive line, started gradually losing their receivers. First Odell Beckham, then Brandon Marshall, now Sterling Shepard. So Manning's weapons were not there. But I think the easiest thing you could say is that this guy was playing shorthanded. You do have to look at the results on the field, and not necessarily the results on the field in regards to wins and losses. Eli Manning has not played well this year. His performance has been below average at the quarterback position. And I know Giants fans are still hot over this. They're still ticked off. And you know what? You should be. This is your franchise player. As Cris Carter would say, he is the fall guy. Whether you could say it was a bad job by the general manager, a bad job by the coach and the coaching staff, a bad job by the players around him, the quarterback is the general. And he has to take, in regards to the media, in regards to any negative backlash when his team is playing bad. That's his responsibility. And you know what? There couldn't be a more outstanding citizen in regards to the way that he handles himself. Now, it's a tricky situation because on one side of it, you're talking about the treatment of an all-time player. And I think Eli Manning will be in the Hall of Fame. He won 2 Super Bowls. The majority of the other quarterbacks that won 2 Super Bowls, particularly ones that won 2 Super Bowl MVPs, end up being enshrined in Canton. You can make a case that this isn't all Eli Manning's fault. But once again, we're talking about how do you deal with that star player on the latter part or the declining part of their career. Now, you can make a case that the Giants could just up and cut him. Eli Manning could get another job. Jacksonville could use a quarterback. Green Bay, if they think they have a chance at the playoffs, would certainly love to use Eli Manning until Aaron Rodgers could come back. So Eli Manning wouldn't have a problem getting a job. The question that I have is, where are the Giants going from here? Is this a courtesy opportunity for Geno Smith because he happens to be number 2 on the depth chart? That he's going to get an opportunity to play just to give him some respect? Are the Giants going to legitimately look at Davis Webb, their rookie quarterback that they drafted this year? I think the answer is probably all the above. You know, to start Davis Webb might insult Geno Smith, but well, let's be honest. I mean, who really cares about Geno Smith's feelings after, from the Giants fans' perspective, what just happened to Eli Manning? Geno Smith, in his very little time, has accomplished very little. He was the quarterback of the Jets for a little bit. Didn't have very much success. Was a free agent this year. Signed with the Giants to compete to be their backup quarterback. He knew what he was getting into. Outside of an injury to Eli Manning, Geno Smith understood pretty good that he probably wasn't going to play this year. Well, he's going to get a little opportunity to play. And what does that mean? Well, listen, I think Giants fans are looking forward to the draft next year. They're looking forward to, hopefully, some wholesale changes throughout the organization. A new general manager, a new coach. They're going to have some money with the salary cap next year. They're going to have, obviously, high draft picks. So they have an opportunity to retool and rebuild this team. Do they need a quarterback? I think it's going to be very hard at this stage, especially if Eli Manning doesn't play or play sparingly the rest of the season, to go in to 2017, 2018, 2018 going into 2019 and say, this is our quarterback. Especially the amount of money that he's making. You're not paying Eli Manning $20+ million a season to count against your salary cap to hold the clipboard. So today is kind of bittersweet in a lot of different ways for the fans of the New York Giants. You got that anger, that you're pissed off, that your star player is treated this way. You can make a case that he is the scapegoat, that he's the fall guy for a 2-9 team. Is he the sole reason the Giants are 2-9? No. But I will say this, he's contributed to it. He has had his worst season performance-wise. And if you want to keep making excuses for him, you can. At some point, he's got to show that he's a star player that's trying to do the best he can with nothing around him. And two things happen in that situation. The first that happens is that star player is able to rise above it, make some plays, but you understand that he's not going to make all the plays because he doesn't have anything around him. But when the guy is making little to no plays, and when you're looking at players that just aren't getting the job done, and he comes up in the same report every week when you talk about it, you got to realize that you're starting to deal with the declining player. Now the Giants essentially saying today, by not starting him, by going with Geno Smith and then hopefully down the road Davis Webb, that Eli Manning is not the quarterback of their future. And I think that's a decision that they had to come to at some point, whether it was towards the end of the season or in the offseason. And they made that decision. So for that point of it, I respect the decision. Did it have to happen now? No. It probably could have happened in the offseason. You probably could have waited until Black Monday when it was time to fire Jerry Reese and time to fire Ben McAdoo, and then hire a new general manager and coach and then figure it out from there. A lot of people feel Eli Manning deserved that. And I'm not going to say he doesn't. But the Giants made a move. And you know what? I respect that move. Like I said, it's not a popular one. And you're never going to deal with a popular move like that when it's involving a star player. I said this is a move that should have been made with Derek Jeter in his last season as the New York Yankees shortstop. Sure, have the going away party. Allow him to be honored the way that he deserved to be honored. But he didn't belong on a field at shortstop as often as he did, batting towards the top of the order. Now, I know Yankees fans aren't going to want to hear that. But you're talking about a player who was obviously a Hall of Famer, obviously a player of a generation, but was a shell of his former self. Ideally, you want to go out on top. You want to go out like David Ortiz did. You want to go out like Ted Williams did. 95+% of the time, that doesn't happen that way. And it doesn't mean that Eli Manning's done. It doesn't mean he's not going to play again. It doesn't mean that his career is over or he's retiring. But it's safe to say that his days as the New York Giants quarterback are officially over. And you give the guy respect. He handles everything with class. He mentions about the discussion about how they were going to work Geno Smith in and Davis Webb in, and still allow him to keep this streak alive. And he said, listen, it's not about the streak. It's about winning games. It's about building and becoming a better football team. And once again, he handled it with class, which is what you would expect from an individual like that. Thinking about it a little bit further, and like I said, the hardest thing to do in professional sports is to manage a declining star. And that's one of the unfortunate things that are going to happen to just about everybody. You're going to be great. Some cases 10, 12, 15 years, you're on top of the world. And the fans and the media, they're always going to want more because they expect that star player to be, from a sports perspective, immortal. And they're not. They're all human beings. And at some point, they're not going to be able to dominate the same way that they did for 10, 12, 15 years. So every organization that has that iconic star player has to come up to that decision at some point and figure out how to manage that player. And the New York Giants, who are one of the classier organizations in professional sports, continue to have a very un-Giant-like season. And I'm not talking about the 2-9 record. That happens. Sometimes you just get beat, and the Giants have gotten beat this year. But they've had a series of things that have gone on and happened in that locker room, throughout the media, that Wellington Mara would certainly be rolling over his grave if he knew what was going on. And the Giants at some point had to make this decision, and they did. They made it. They wiped their hands with it. It's over with. Giants fans could be upset. Sure, they have every right to be. And if I'm a big Giants and Eli Manning fan that enjoyed the 2 Super Bowls against the New England Patriots, where they didn't seem to have a chance either year, and they went out there and beat them. They beat an undefeated New England Patriots team, an 18-0 team in the Super Bowl. If I'm a Giants fan that grew up in this generation and worships this guy as my franchise player, I'm going to be pissed for a little while. The only issue that I have with this is that you're not selling the Giants fan on the future with Geno Smith. And like I said, maybe it's just Geno Smith getting in there, getting his foot wet, getting a chance to play, maybe start a couple games. And at some point he'll be relieved by Davis Webb and you're going to get a good look at him before the season. If that's the case, then I think the Giants need to see that. They need to see what they have in Davis Webb before they hit the offseason. I don't think they drafted him to be a backup quarterback. They drafted him with the promise that he has to be potentially the quarterback of the future. And like I said, when he's holding a clipboard on a team that's on pace to win 3 or 4 games all season, you're never going to be able to figure that out. So I think from that perspective, the Giants got it right. If you're going to spend the last couple games of the season with Davis Webb as your quarterback, just trying to see what he could do in an NFL game, then I think they did the right thing by sitting Eli Manning. By making this decision, they're pretty much ending Eli Manning's career as a New York Giant. I can't imagine whether they're going with Davis Webb next year, whether they draft a quarterback up in the first couple rounds. I can't imagine Eli Manning's cap value being on the Giants roster next year. And what does that mean? Well, it means he's probably going to be playing somewhere else. You know, you look at what Jacksonville has done since Tom Coughlin has left. He's brought a lot of the same energy and the same style of play with the Jacksonville Jaguars that he did in his years as a New York Giants coach. It seems like a perfect fit. Blake Bortles is not the answer. You're looking at a quarterback there and basically a team that is a quarterback away. I think it would be nice to see Eli Manning there, playing with a good team, with a good defense. Like I said, the only thing that they're missing is a quarterback. So for those Giants fans that feel that Eli Manning just didn't have any help, well, you may have a chance to see that firsthand, what Eli Manning can do with help if he's quarterbacking the Jacksonville Jaguars next season. And you know what? As a fan, you should root for him. Obviously, you don't want to see him beat the Giants. You want to see the Giants get better and improve and become a decent team in their own right. And maybe this is the perfect storm for Eli Manning getting something that he deserves. Because once again, what have we heard the last 3-4 years? Eli Manning can't do it all by himself. He has no help. He has no offensive line. He has no running game. A couple years ago, he had no defense. Of course, the Giants got him a defense last year, and they went 11-5. But for the Giants right now, playing out the rest of this season, you might as well see what you got in Davis Webb. Now I'll throw the one rare possibility, and I don't think there's a big of a chance of this happening, but maybe Geno Smith shows you something. And I'm not saying that Geno Smith is going to be the quarterback of the Giants for the future. But maybe Geno Smith gets himself a job next year somewhere by getting the opportunity to play. With 5 games left in the season, that's still a lot of time. That's still a lot of snaps. That's a lot of drives. That's a lot of quarters. That's a lot of games. And, you know, people have been down on Geno Smith really since the day he was drafted by the New York Jets. He's going to get an opportunity to play. Let's see what he does with it. I think for Geno Smith, this is about Geno Smith. If he goes out there, executes the Giants offense the way Ben McAdoo wants to run it, and all of a sudden you see a difference, different results, he shows he can lead a team, maybe he gets a chance to compete with, you know, for a starting job somewhere in the NFL. Because Lord knows, there aren't very good quarterbacks in the NFL. It's very top-heavy. You got the first 8 to 10, and obviously you can rank them however you want. There's a drop-off at some point. But really, after you get through the first 8 to 10 quarterbacks, the top quarterbacks in the NFL, there's a huge drop-off. You look at cities that are running guys out there that you wonder how. You know, when I was talking about Colin Kaepernick a couple weeks ago, yes, Colin Kaepernick, his age and his skill set, he could be a starter on a handful of teams. And Geno Smith right now has an opportunity to put himself in the mix somewhere. Especially when you're talking about the bottom 8 to 10 teams, who are all hoping to strike gold by drafting a quarterback next year. Other teams may be moving on from their quarterback. You'll get a guy like Josh McCown with the New York Jets. He's had a good season. He's not going to get himself a long-term contract extension. But there's enough teams that are going to be interested in having him in the mix. There's going to be a lot of teams that don't have a profound starter and would want to use Josh McCown to compete with them. Well, Geno Smith is not going to be looked at that way because he hasn't been playing. So he has a chance to do that for himself. And if he does, good for him. Like I said, Geno Smith playing right now is all about Geno Smith and how he markets himself to remain in the National Football League. If he goes out there and stinks up the joint, as we hit the halfway point here on the Pass Ball Show, once again, John Pielli with you on the 28th day of November, Tuesday, 2017. Talking a little bit about the Giants. Eli Manning, no longer the quarterback of the future. And I think this was a decision that probably was made. And I think in this one regard, the fact that the Giants decided that he is not going to be the quarterback of the future, why play him? And I know that's going to rub some people the wrong way. People are going to be pretty ticked off, especially diehard Giants fans that worship him for winning 2 Super Bowls. The Giants are going to look like a different team next year. Hopefully from the top down. They'll bring in a new general manager who will bring in a new coach. And once those decisions are made, they'll figure out what they want to do in the draft. Do they want to draft a quarterback? Maybe they'll bring in somebody that looks at Eli Manning as being the answer. Maybe not. But it looks like right now they've decided that they want to move on. And Eli Manning had a great career with the New York Giants. Pretty similar to Derek Jeter with the New York Yankees. The only problem is whether it was Derek Jeter himself or a fear from Joe Girardi and Brian Cashman in the Yankees front office. They felt like he was entitled to be able to play his last days, his last entire season at shortstop and bat towards the top of the order, where he was killing the New York Yankees. You can make a good case that the main reason why the New York Yankees didn't make the playoffs in Derek Jeter's last season was because of Derek Jeter. And look at how that's turned out. Didi Gregorius has been outstanding. How are you going to fill Derek Jeter's shoes? Well, he's clearly one of the 3 best offensive players on the New York Yankees. And you can make a case that he might be their all-around best player. And at some point, the Giants are going to move on. We're going to see Geno Smith and Davis Webb. And then you'll see what they do in the offseason. They're going to draft a quarterback. Maybe they want to bring in a quarterback from another team. It's just one of those unfortunate things that when you have a star player that has done so much and has met so much for a franchise, these people don't just fall out of the sky. And it might be a very long time before the Giants have a quarterback like Eli Manning again. Moving on. Be with you up until 7 o'clock. Carlos Beltran looks like he's going to get his interview for the New York Yankees managerial job, which, by the way, have we seen a process that has dragged on way more than it ever should have? I mean, you didn't see any other team struggle with coming to terms of a new decision on who their next manager is going to be. There was a process. They had candidates, they did interviews, and at some point they made a decision. It doesn't seem like the Yankees are close to making a decision on who their next manager is going to be. Apparently they've interviewed 5 candidates, 5 different types of candidates, Only one of them has been a major league manager before. And I think this very opportunistically could fall right into the lap of Carlos Beltran. Obviously, an extremely well-respected player. A leader. A guy that knows baseball. As a player, was the example of what a five-tool player should be. Can hit for average, hit for power, can run, play great defense, and had a great throwing arm. Those are skills that you could certainly pass on to younger players and preach and make sure the game's played right. And, people were talking about how it would be so uncharacteristic for a player to take off his uniform as a player and become a manager, where we tend to forget about baseball history. For years upon years upon years, the best players were the team's managers. Lou Boudreau, Rogers Hornsby, Walter Johnson. Player upon player that was a star player on their particular team ended up being the team's manager. So it is a little bit of a throwback, but I certainly think it could be done. Now, I would hope, and I hope the Yankees are looking at this the same way, there should be a little sense of urgency to get this done. Figure out who it is that's going to be the manager and have that set in place, hopefully before the winter meetings. Because we've hit the part of the off season where there's going to be a series of transactions. For whatever reason, there hasn't been a lot yet. At this time last year, there was a ton of player movement, ton of free agents signed, a handful of trades made. And it seems like we're going at a snail's pace. And it doesn't get any slower than a pace that's set by the New York Yankees trying to fill the vacancy of their next manager. I like Beltran. I think he would probably make a good manager. My question initially was, is this something that he wanted to do right now? And you know what? The fact that he's being interviewed answers that question. He wants to do it. Okay. It's not like the Yankees have had a series of, overwhelming candidates that they've interviewed to this point. It seems like one is more outside the box than the other. From Rob Thompson, one of Joe Girardi's top assistants, his top coaches, to Aaron Boone, who hasn't worn a uniform since the last day that he played. He's been in a broadcast booth. To Chris Woodward, former utility player and Dodgers coach. To Eric Wedge. And I liked the possibility of Eric Wedge because this is a guy that did a lot with not very much in Cleveland and Seattle. Obviously, he had more success in Cleveland. But he's shown he could do it. He has the experience. And I compared Eric Wedge in a couple cases to Joe Torre when the Yankees hired him after the 1995 season. Joe Torre, as a manager before that, was bad. I know he managed some very bad Mets teams. I can't blame him for that. He took hold of the Atlanta Braves in 1982 when he had the two-time National League MVP in Dale Murphy. Got to the playoffs that first year, digressed the next two seasons, and was out. Then he got the job with the St. Louis Cardinals. They loved him in St. Louis. He got to essentially take over for Whitey Herzog. And what did he do there? It was another bad time in St. Louis Cardinals history. he basically bridged the gap between Whitey Herzog, who's a Hall of Fame manager, and Tony La Russa, who's another Hall of Fame manager. Herzog and La Russa had success there. Joe Torre didn't. So sometimes you don't need to hire a person that has a championship pedigree and just known for winning championship upon championship. It's the right leader for the right team. And I hope at some point the New York Yankees decide on their manager, whoever it is. I told you before I'd like to see Wedge get the job. But honestly, if Carlos Beltran got it, I think it would be great. I think he certainly appeals to the younger player. You know, you look at him with the Yankees, his impact on the younger players there, his impact on a young Houston Astro team last year. He's been around the game a long time. He had a Hall of Fame career himself. But I said the same thing that I could say to any manager that takes that job. It's a big challenge. It's going to make your hair gray. It's going to make you age. And the only thing that's going to keep it going is if you manage to win championships. Joe Girardi led the New York Yankees to the 7th game of the American League Championship Series last year. The next manager, doesn't matter who it is. Doesn't matter if it's Chris Woodward or Aaron Boone or Eric Wedge or Rob Thompson or Hensley Mullins. They're going to be expected to win. They're going to be expected to take that team to the World Series. And the good thing about it is the Yankees have the tools to do it. They have the players to do it. They're the favorites to get Shohei Ohtani. They got Tanaka coming back. They got Sonny Gray coming back. Luis Severino emerged as the ace of that staff. He's coming back. You got Judge and Sanchez and Gregorius. This is a good team. So you might want to say there's a lot of pressure put on the next manager, whoever it is. They're going to have the resources to get it done. Is it all about communication? Well, it has something to do with it. Part of it is having the right players. And I tell you, it's an ideal job to take if you can handle it. And the question is, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle things when they don't go right? When you get knocked with a couple injuries? When the media and the press and the talk show host criticize your every move? Which, by the way, your hands are tied behind your back anyway. Remember, a manager in Major League Baseball has the least impact on the performance of a team in all of professional sports. Game planning comes from the front office. The players are picked by the front office. The farm system, your younger players that are coming up, are developed by your front office. Manager's going to write a lineup card, have an idea of when he's going to take out his pitchers, and in some cases that's going to be picked for him too. And now, you essentially want a guy that's going to coddle his players. Make them feel loved. Right? Mickey Callaway getting the job as the New York Mets manager says he's going to love his players more than anybody's ever loved anybody. There's got to be some accountability in there too. And at some point, players are going to underperform. At some point, players are going to act out of turn. Say and do things they're not supposed to do. A manager has to take that responsibility on too. So, especially in a media market of New York, It's not an easy job. But like I said, I think it would be cool to see Carlos Beltran as a Major League manager with the Yankees. Let's see how he does it in his interview. And if he blows the Yankees away, hopefully we'll get an announcement soon. So the Yankees could go on with the rest of their offseason and figure out how they're going to put the right pieces around the talent that they have to go after a World Series championship in 2018. Once again, John Pielli, happy to be with you. I did want to go over the 2018 Hall of Fame ballot because every year we get into this debate and we talk about the baseball writers who, in many cases, are putting 10 names on every ballot. Yet we go back to the inception of the Baseball Hall of Fame, and you've never seen any more than 5 players going back to the first year of the Hall of Fame announcement in 1936. And you got 2 players that got over 70% of the vote last year in Trevor Hoffman and Vlad Guerrero. I'd like to assume that those 2 are going to get in this year. You have 2 players that are first time on a ballot, have very good chances and are expected to be Hall of Famers also in Chipper Jones and Jim Thome. So that's 4 players right there. And then you still have the field, which obviously includes a lot of Hall of Fame caliber players, led by Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Manny Ramirez. There's guys like Curt Schilling and Mike Mussina who aren't going to get as much attention now just because of the other names that are on this ballot. Fred McGriff, I've said all along, has many home runs as Lou Gehrig. Why does he not get more of a following? So it's really going to come down to the possibility of having 5 players get in, which is something that hasn't been done in ages. And if it is, it's really only leaving 1 spot for 1 player that could possibly get 75% or more of the vote. I think Hoffman will get in. I think Vlad Guerrero will get in. I think Chipper Jones will get in. I think Jim Thome should be in on the first ballot. But I think in the end it's going to be close. He's either going to just miss out or he's going to just get in. So if you're talking about 4 players getting 75% of the vote or more, we're talking about a 5th player to be included on 75% of the ballots. And that's a lot to say. Because there's going to be some writers that are going to say, hey, I only think 1 or 2 players should get in on any given year. Now, what's interesting about this is you have the baseball writers being asked to reveal their ballots. So every ballot that's put out there this year, we're going to know exactly who the writer voted for or didn't vote for. Some people are upset by that. I think if you vote for somebody, it shouldn't be anonymously. And what's wrong with throwing out a ballot and sitting there for a couple minutes explaining why you voted the way you did? I included players X, Y, and Z because. I didn't put this player on my ballot because. It only takes a couple minutes. The Baseball Hall of Fame is trusting your judgment as a writer to decide who should be in and who shouldn't be in. Now, of course, blame comes with that. There's going to be ridicule involved. Those players that vote for, let's say, a Jamie Moyer or a Johan Santana. Actually, not even. I'll go even a little lower level. Let's say somebody gives a vote for Brad Lidge or a vote for Kevin Millwood or Orlando Hudson. That sounds a little better because you're talking about players that you understand had good careers, but in no way would ever be considered Hall of Famers. Now that writer may say, listen, I followed Orlando Hudson's whole career. I respect him. I'm using one of my votes because I respect him. Now the backlash to that is going to be, wow, you have such a deep ballot that could be potentially 20 deep. We're only asking you to take 10 players. And you wasted one of your votes on somebody that realistically everybody understood could not get in or would not get in. So that writer that would decide to do that may want to think twice because their ballot is being released. They're putting a name to the people that they voted themselves. Now, if we're talking about a year where the ballot's weak, where you're only dealing with a couple of Hall of Fame caliber players and a couple other people are, within a discussion you can make a debate for, it'll be one thing. But you got Hoffman, Guerrero, Edgar Martinez, Clemens, Bonds, Messina, Schilling, Manny Ramirez, Larry Walker, Fred McGriff, Jeff Kent, Gary Sheffield, Billy Wagner, Sammy Sosa, Chipper Jones, Jim Thome. Right there, that's 16 players. And I think you can make a strong case for each one of those 16 players. You want to talk about PEDs? You want to not talk about PEDs, whatever. The bottom line that is the fact that when those players put a uniform on, they accomplished a lot. They accomplished numbers that are matched by players that are in the Hall of Fame. Now, because of that, you have the right, these writers have the right, if they want to withhold certain players because they feel the Hall is, it's such a sacred place. It wasn't sacred in its beginning days. And when you're talking about players that are in the Hall of Fame that played in the 19th century, you're dealing with a lot of players that were not good people. And if we want to use the quote-unquote character clause, a lot of them probably wouldn't make it in today's standards. So when did this character clause start? It's one thing to not put somebody in the Hall of Fame because they're ineligible. Pete Rose is ineligible. Joe Jackson is ineligible. But now we throw this character clause in there. And obviously going back to Joe Morgan's statements, which I talked about on the show last week, he's giving the assumption that the Hall of Fame is squeaky clean already. And he's going on the premise that there are no players in the Hall of Fame that ever used performance-enhancing drugs. Yet I haven't even heard him address the issues of amphetamines. First question I would ask Joe Morgan, did you take amphetamines? And if his answer is yes, it doesn't make him a bad person. But the game has changed now that players cannot use amphetamines. If they test positive for them, they get suspended. And they're thrown in a category where they're considered drug abusers in baseball. So there's so many things that are fishy about this. I think at some point you have to open up the hall to the players that are the most deserving. And you could talk about the steroids era. You could put a wing for players that were in the steroids era. You could put that on their plaques if you want. 762 home runs is still 762 home runs. I don't care how he hit them. I don't care if he hit the home runs with a syringe. He still hit 762 home runs. Manny Ramirez put on a performance for a decade and a half where he was Jimmy Fox. He still put up those numbers. He still dominated the game like Jimmy Fox did. There's so much you could get into, but to close this point that I'm making about the Hall of Fame this year, it's going to be pretty hard to see 4 players not getting in. Hoffman, Guerrero, Jones, and just because of the stackedness of the ballot, Jim told me he may have to wait another year. But I'll assume he gets in. That really leaves, realistically, only one more spot if 75% of the writers can vote for one particular player. Based off of merit and numbers, I'd give it to Bonds. I'd give it to Clemens. I'd give it to Ramirez. But I understand the day and age that we live in right now. And I understand there's still as much of an anti-steroid push as there's ever been. They've opened it up a little bit. Guys like Piazza and Bagwell, which we're not sure about, say they didn't use anabolic steroids. But we don't really know if we believe them. They're in. There's other players out there that might have used, and we may never know. Until they fall on hard times and decide to write a book about it, we're not going to find out until then. So the Baseball Hall of Fame vote is going to continue to take up a lot of time. But just remember, there's no other sport out there, not in the National Football League, not in the NBA, not in the NHL, where the best players that accomplish the most, put up the best numbers, aren't enshrined in its Hall of Fame. It's almost like baseball tries to find out a reason to not put you in. I understand Pete Rose is ineligible, but for crying out loud, he had 4,256 hits in his career. That was more than Ty Cobb, more than anybody in baseball history. And there was never a doubt about any of it either. It wasn't like he juiced. Yeah, he had a bad gambling problem. He got himself banned for life. But that didn't impact anything on the field that he did. He was the epitome of what baseball is supposed to be played. Be back with you tomorrow right here on the Pass Ball Show. I want to say God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.